On 25 July 1944, near Saint-Lô in Normandy, 1st United States Army under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley launched Operation Cobra after a one-day weather delay. In the opening, about 3:00, United States aircraft struck German positions fronting the Saint-Lô-Perriers axis. Short-drop bombs fell among forward American areas and killed Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair near the front, a stark reminder of the risks of massed air power. The operation's purpose was to rupture 7th Army's defensive line and open the road toward Coutances and Avranches for a decisive breakout. VII Corps, led by Major General J. Lawton Collins, formed the spearhead. Opposing them, Guenther von Kluge at OB West and Colonel General Paul Hausser at 7th Army attempted to hold a crust anchored by Panzer Division under General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, with 5th Parachute Division in the PAR sector, and as Cobra unfolded between 25 and 31 July, elements of 2nd Panzer, 116th Panzer, and 2nd SS Panzer committed piecemeal. The terrain was the Norman bocage high earthen banks topped with dense hedges that canalized movement and cut visibility to a few dozen yards. United States forces adapted with Sergeant Curtis G. Coulin's Rhino hedgerow cutters, which by late July equipped roughly 3/5 of 1st Army's Shermans and allowed tanks to burst through field boundaries at unexpected points. Equally decisive was communications. Sherman tanks carried SCR 508 frequency modulation sets about 2027, 9 MHz crystal-controlled, that gave clear, short-range voice across platoon, company and battalion nets, despite engine noise and vegetation. Infantry platoons used SCR 300 frequency modulation backpack sets about 40-48 MHz to talk to their companies and coordinate closely with armor. German tanks typically used Fugue 5 amplitude modulation sets about 27-33, 3 MHz, roughly 10-20 watts, which were adequate for basic control but more vulnerable to static and clutter. Higher headquarters relied heavily on landlines that United States artillery and airstrikes repeatedly severed. The bombardment on 25 July shattered many strongpoints and disrupted Panzerlehr's cohesion. The combination of hedgerow cutters and reliable FM radio nets then allowed VII Corps to seize the initiative, synchronizing armor, infantry, artillery, and engineers, field by field, and converting an initial breach into a rolling breakthrough toward Avranches. As the dust settled from the 25th July 1944 bombardment, VIII Corps surged forward into Normandy's hedgerow maze. Major General J. Lawton Collins directed his units to exploit the fractured German line targeting gaps where Panzer Division reeled from the aerial assault. The terrain, a patchwork of sunken lanes and thick bocage, slowed tanks to a crawl each hedgerow, a potential strongpoint for German defenders. United States forces countered with Sergeant Curtis G. Coulin's Rhino cutters welded to approximately 3 out of 5 Shermans, slicing through earthen walls to carve narrow lanes. These cutters, paired with dense frequency modulation radio nets, enabled a new kind of maneuver. The SCR 508 radio operating between 20 and 27.9 MHz linked Sherman platoons to their companies and battalions. Its crystal-controlled channels cutting through the bocage caused interference. Infantry equipped with SCR 300 backpack radios operating at 40 to 48 MHz maintained voice contact with armor coordinating at gaps where cutters breached the hedgerows. This synergy allowed small units to move as one, bypassing German strongpoints rather than grinding through them. The number that matters is 3,000 aircraft, creating initial chaos now exploited by ground forces. German defences, anchored by Panzerlehr and 5th Parachute Division, fought tenaciously but unevenly. Their Fugue 5 amplitude modulation radios operating at 27 to 33.3 MHz struggled with static in the cluttered terrain, and repeated bombardments severed many landlines that higher headquarters depended on. German tanks, often limited to roughly 10-watt transmissions, faltered in coordinating rapid responses. By contrast, United States frequency modulation nets delivered clear real-time orders, allowing platoons to adjust to shifting threats. On 26 July the 7th, Corps pressed deeper, navigating bomb craters and hedgerow lanes. German positions, though discontinuous, held firm in pockets, forcing Collins to rely on radio nets to redirect units around resistance. A cold reality emerged, with landlines cut again and again under relentless shelling. Colonel General Paul Hausser's 7th Army struggled to track United States movements, while Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, overseeing OB West, could not reinforce in time. The bocage, while a natural fortress, became a trap for defenders unable to communicate swiftly. The advance gained momentum by 27th July, as United States forces learned the rhythm of the terrain. Sherman commanders used SCR 508 sets to call in artillery or redirect platoons, their voices steady over frequency modulation channels. Infantry moving alongside relayed enemy positions via SCR 300 radios, ensuring tanks avoided ambushes. This coordination shone in small unit actions across the Saint-Lô to Perrières axis, steadily eroding German cohesion. Panzer-Lehr's remnants, battered by bombs, and now outmaneuvered, began to fracture. United States tactics emphasized speed over frontal assaults, bypassing fortified farms to maintain pressure toward Coutances. The bocage's constraints, narrow lanes, limited visibility, were mitigated by cutters and radio nets which kept columns aligned and responsive. Air support amplified the ground effort. IX Tactical Air Command's P-47 Thunderbolts, guided by radio reports and ground marks from advancing units, struck German columns attempting to regroup. These strikes, precise and relentless, targeted tanks and supply trucks, further isolating defenders. The Roncey Road, a choke point west of Saint-Lô, became a graveyard for German vehicles by 29th July, as air-ground coordination overwhelmed retreating units. United States forces, linked by frequency modulation, could call in strikes within minutes, a tempo German amplitude modulation nets could not match. The breakthrough was not yet complete, but the crust of the German line was crumbling. VII Corps' advance, supported by 4th Armoured Division's push on the wider front, set the stage for a pivot toward Avranches. The combination of physical breaching, Rhino cutters tearing through hedgerows, and informational breaching frequency modulation nets, ensuring control, created a momentum that German commanders struggled to counter. As 27th July ended, the United States front expanded, with Coutances coming into view. The operation's success now hinged on sustaining this pace, exploiting the chaos sown by 3,000 aircraft, and the relentless coordination of radio-linked units. The bocage, once a defender's ally, was becoming a pathway to German defeat. By 28th July, 1944, the German defensive crust along the Saint-Lô to Perrières axis began to disintegrate under the weight of 1st United States Army's advance. 7th Corps, led by Major General J. Lawton Collins, pressed through the bocage, exploiting gaps opened by the initial bombardment of about 3,000 aircraft. 4th Armoured Division, operating under VIII Corps, drove toward Coutances, their Sherman tanks equipped with SCR 508 frequency modulation radios, operating at 20 to 27.9 MHz. These radios maintained clear voice nets, linking platoons to battalions in real time, even as hedgerows limited visibility to mere yards. Infantry carrying SCR 300 backpack radios at 40 to 48 MHz coordinated with tanks at breach points, where Sergeant Curtis G. Culin's Rhino cutters tore through earthen walls. Approximately 3 out of 5 Shermans carried these cutters, enabling rapid lane creation through the bocage's maze. This combination of physical and informational tools allowed United States forces to outmaneuver German defenders whose responses grew increasingly disjointed. German 7th Army, under Colonel General Paul Hausser, struggled to hold its line. Panzer-Lehr Division, battered by the opening airstrikes, could not regroup effectively. 5th Parachute Division and elements of 2nd Panzer, 116th Panzer and 2nd SS Panzer fought in scattered pockets, their Fugue 5 amplitude modulation radios operating at 27 to 33.3 MHz hampered by static and limited range. German command relied heavily on landlines, which repeated artillery and air attacks severed during the first days of Cobra. Coordination faltered under 72 hours of sustained pressure. This left Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge overseeing OB West, unable to shift reserves quickly enough to plug gaps. The adversary's realization was stark. American tanks and infantry, enabled by reliable frequency modulation, nets were coordinating faster than German responses. On 28 July, Coutances fell to 4th Armored Division, a pivotal moment in the breakout. Sherman commanders used SCR 508 sets to deconflict columns, navigating bomb craters and hedgerow lanes, while infantry relayed enemy positions via SCR 300 radios. This allowed small units to bypass fortified positions, isolating German defenders rather than engaging them head-on. A Sherman company advancing through a breached hedgerow could radio adjacent infantry to clear a farm, while tanks suppressed machine gun nests. Such actions, repeated across the front, turned German resistance into fragmented holdouts. Air support amplified the ground effort. EX Tactical Air Command's P-47 Thunderbolts, guided by ground radio reports, struck German columns attempting to regroup. The Roncey road battles, intensifying on 29 July, saw German vehicles, tanks, trucks and half-tracks destroyed in large numbers as airstrikes exploited targets identified by advancing units. The tempo of these attacks, enabled by frequency modulation nets, overwhelmed German attempts to reorganize. The German line's collapse was not solely due to air power or armor, but the synergy of combined arms. Rhino cutters opened physical lanes. Frequency modulation radios ensured control within those lanes. Airstrikes punished any German movement reported by ground units. This integration allowed United States forces to maintain a relentless pace in sectors covering more than 10 miles per day despite the bocage's constraints. German commanders, reliant on slower amplitude modulation and disrupted landlines, could not match this speed. By 29 July, the advance pivoted toward Avranches, with 7th and the VIII Corps exploiting the widening breach. Panzer, once a formidable force, was reduced to scattered remnants, its ability to counterattack crippled by communication failures and relentless United States pressure. The number that matters is 3,000 aircraft setting the stage, but it was the ground-air radio synergy that sustained the breakthrough. As German pockets disintegrated west of Saint-Lô, United States forces emerged from the bocage's chokehold, their radios humming with orders to press forward. The stage was set for the final push to Avranches, where the breakout would open the door to deeper operational gains. The German 7th Army, outmaneuvered and outcommunicated, faced the unraveling of its entire front. By 30th July 1944, 1st United States Army had transformed the breach in the German line into a full-scale breakout. 7th Corps, under Major General J. Lawton Collins and VIII Corps, with 4th Armored Division leading, surged toward Avranches, leaving the bocage's confines behind. The initial bombardment by about 3,000 aircraft had shattered Panzer Division's cohesion, and now the relentless advance of Sherman tanks and infantry widened the gap. Shermans, equipped with SCR 508 frequency modulation radios operating at 20 to 27.9 MHz, maintained seamless communication across platoons, companies and battalions. These crystal-controlled nets, far less susceptible to static than German Fugue 5 amplitude modulation radios, allowed United States commanders to redirect units in near real time. Infantry, using SCR 300 backpack radios at 40 to 48 MHz, coordinated with tanks at hedgerow breaches, where Rhino cutters fitted to approximately 3 out of 5 Shermans smashed through earthen barriers. This integration of physical and informational tools drove the advance at a pace German 7th Army could not counter. German defences, led by Colonel General Paul Hausser, crumbled under the strain. Panzer, reduced to fragments, could not mount a cohesive response. 5th Parachute Division and elements of 2nd, Panzer, 116th Panzer and 2nd SS, Panzer fought in isolated pockets, their Fugue 5 sets operating at 27 to 33.3 MHz and typically around 10 to 20 watts, hampered by interference and range limits in the bocage. Landlines that higher headquarters relied on had been repeatedly severed by United States artillery and airstrikes during the first days of Cobra. Under several days of sustained pressure, German radio and wire communications struggled to keep pace. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, overseeing OB West, faced the impossible problem of shifting reserves fast enough to close gaps that widened by the hour. United States frequency modulation nets, by contrast, enabled precise adjustments, allowing columns to bypass strong points and maintain momentum toward Avranches. The Roncey road battles intensifying from 28th through 30th July epitomized the German collapse. IX Tactical Air Command's P-47 Thunderbolts, guided by ground units' radio reports and marks, struck retreating German columns. Tanks, half-tracks and supply trucks littered the roads as air-ground coordination exploited targets identified over SCR 508 and SCR 300 nets. This synergy turned retreat into rout. 4th Armoured Division, leading the drive to Avranches, covered more than 10 miles in a single day. In sectors, its Shermans, navigating open approaches with radio-directed precision. A company commander spotting a German anti-tank gun could radio infantry to flank, while tanks suppressed the threat, a tactic repeated across the front. The bocage's constraints, once a defender's ally, now favoured the attacker, as United States forces exploited open lanes and clear communications to outpace German reserves. The number that matters is the opening shock of about 3,000 aircraft, but the breakout's success rested on sustained coordination. Rhino cutters cleared physical obstacles. Frequency modulation radios ensured control through those lanes. Airstrikes punished German movement as ground units reported positions. This triad overwhelmed Hausser's ability to reconstitute his line. By 31st July, Avranches fell, securing the gateway into Brittany and the broader French interior. Panzer-Lehr, once a cornerstone of the German defence, was effectively destroyed, its remnants scattered or retreating. The United States advance, now free of the bocage's chokehold, set the stage for the next operational phase. The German counterstroke at Mortain planned for 7th to 13th August. The synergy of United States tactics, cutters, radios and air support had turned a tactical breach into an operational triumph. German amplitude modulation and disrupted landlines could not match the speed and clarity of United States frequency modulation nets, which delivered continuous voice control across cluttered terrain. As 1st United States Army emerged into open country, the German 7th Army faced encirclement risks, with falaise looming on the horizon. The lesson was clear. Reliable communication paired with physical adaptability converted a punched hole into a decisive breakout, reshaping the Normandy campaign. By 31st July, 1944, 1st United States Army had transformed the breach in the German line into a full-scale breakout emerging from Normandy's bocage into more open terrain. The seizure of the Avranches area and the bridgehead at Pont-au-Beau by elements of 4th Armoured Division marked the operational culmination of Operation Cobra, securing a gateway to Brittany and beyond. The initial bombardment by about 3,000 aircraft had fractured Panzer-Lehr Division, but it was the relentless ground advance enabled by Rhino cutters and frequency modulation radios that turned a breach into a rout. Shermans, equipped with SCR 508 radios, operating at 20 to 27.9 MHz, maintained clear voice nets across platoons, companies and battalions. These crystal-controlled systems, far less susceptible to static than German fugue. 5 amplitude modulation radios allowed commanders to redirect columns around German strongpoints in sectors covering more than 10 miles per day. Infantry using SCR 300 backpack radios at 40 to 48 MHz coordinated with tanks at hedgerow breaches, where Rhino cutters mounted on approximately 3 out of 5 Shermans carved paths through earthen walls. This synergy of physical and informational tools overwhelmed German 7th Army's ability to respond. German forces under Colonel General Paul Hausser were in disarray. Panzer-Lehr was wrecked, its remnants scattered or destroyed. 5th Parachute Division and elements of 2nd Panzer, 116th Panzer and 2nd SS Panzer fought in isolated pockets, their FUG-5 sets operating at 27 to 33.3 MHz and typically around 10 to 20 watts, hampered by interference and range limits in the bocage. Landlines vital to German command had been repeatedly severed by United States artillery and airstrikes during the first days of Cobra, degrading higher-level coordination. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, overseeing OB West, faced a front unraveling faster than reserves could be shifted. United States frequency modulation, Nets, by contrast, enabled near-real-time adjustments, ensuring momentum where German amplitude modulation and disrupted landlines faltered. The Roncey road battles intensifying through 30th July underscored the communication disparity. IX, Tactical Air Command's P-47. Thunderbolts, guided by ground radio reports, and marks struck German columns retreating toward Avranches. Tanks, half-tracks and supply trucks littered the roads as air-ground integration exploited targets identified over SCR 508 and SCR 300 nets. This synergy turned withdrawal into devastation. 4th Armoured Division, leading the drive to Avranches, advanced more than 10 miles in a single day in sectors its Shermans navigating open approaches with radio-directed precision. A Sherman platoon leader, spotting a panther through a breached hedgerow, could radio infantry to flank, while tanks pinned the enemy, a tactic repeated across the front. Such actions, enabled by clear voice nets, eroded German cohesion, leaving pockets of resistance isolated and ineffective. The communication lesson was stark. Frequency modulation nets, with their clarity and reliability in cluttered terrain, outmatched German systems. SCR 508 radios in Shermans and SCR 300 sets with infantry delivered continuous control, allowing United States forces to exploit the bocage's constraints while German amplitude modulation struggled. The operation's success set the stage for the German counterstroke at Mortain planned for 7th to 13th August and the eventual Falaise encirclement. The breakthrough was not air power alone, but a triad of Rhino cutters opening lanes, frequency modulation radios maintaining control, and airstrikes punishing reported movements. This synergy produced an operational triumph, unraveling the German front and opening routes deeper into France. As 1st United States Army advanced, the bocage's chokehold faded, replaced by open fields, where radio nets continued to guide the tempo. The German 7th Army, outcommunicated and outmaneuvered, faced the spectre of encirclement with Panzer-Lehr's destruction, a testament to the power of integrated arms and reliable communication. As 31st July 1944 faded, 1st United States Army stood poised beyond Avranches, the bocage's grip broken. Operation Cobra's success, driven by about 3,000 aircraft and sustained by Rhino cutters and frequency modulation radios, had unraveled German 7th Army's front. 4th Armoured Division's capture of Avranches and the bridgehead at Pont-au-Beau opened routes to Brittany and the French interior, setting the stage for the German counterstroke at Mortain, planned for 7th to 13th August. Shermans, equipped with SCR 508 frequency modulation radios operating at 20 to 27.9 MHz, maintained clear voice nets, linking platoons to battalions across the chaotic advance. Infantry using SCR 300 backpack radios at 40 to 48 MHz coordinated with tanks at hedgerow breaches, where Rhino cutters fitted to approximately 3 out of 5 Shermans carved lanes through bocage walls. This integration in sectors covering more than 10 miles in a single day turned a tactical breach into an operational triumph. The number that matters is about 3,000 aircraft, igniting the chaos, but frequency modulation nets sustained the momentum that German systems could not match. German 7th Army under Colonel General Paul Hausser faced collapse. Panzer-Lehr's destruction left a void. 5th Parachute Division and remnants of 2nd Panzer, 116th Panzer, and 2nd SS Panzer could not reform a cohesive line. Their Fugue 5 amplitude modulation radios, operating at 27 to 33.3 MHz, with around 10 watts, faltered in the bocage's clutter, while repeatedly severed landlines crippled command at higher echelons. German coordination was badly degraded after several days of relentless United States pressure. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, overseeing OB West, struggled to rally reserves as United States forces outpaced his orders. United States frequency modulation nets, by contrast, enabled real-time rerouting, allowing VIII and VIII Corps to exploit gaps and bypass strongpoints, maintaining a tempo that left German defenders reeling. The strategic implications of Cobra's success unfolded rapidly. The breakthrough at Avranches positioned 1st United States Army to support the broader Allied advance threatening to encircle German forces in Normandy. The Falaise pocket forming by mid-August loomed as the next decisive blow, where combined Allied pressure would trap much of 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army. The Roncey road battles concluding by 30th July had foreshadowed this, with IX Tactical Air Command's P-47, Thunderbolts guided by SCR 508 and SCR 300 radio reports and marks, destroying German columns. This air-ground synergy, reliant on the clarity of frequency modulation, ensured strikes hit targets within minutes, a tempo German amplitude modulation could not match. A Sherman commander spotting a retreating Panzer IV could pass coordinates for a strike, while tanks pinned the enemy, a tactic repeated across the front. Such actions, enabled by reliable voice nets, cemented Cobra's operational impact, setting conditions for Falaise's encirclement. The communication edge defined Cobra's legacy. SCR 508 and SCR 300 frequency modulation nets, markedly less susceptible to static in cluttered terrain, allowed United States forces to navigate the bocage's constraints, coordinating armor, infantry, and air strikes with precision. German reliance on amplitude modulation and fragile landlines, by contrast, left their command structure brittle, unable to adapt to the fluid battlefield. Rhino cutters opened physical lanes, frequency modulation radios maintained control within them, airstrikes exploited reported movements. The triad overwhelmed German defenses, proving that reliable short-range communication could turn tactical gains into strategic victories. As United States forces rolled toward Falaise, the lesson endured in confined terrain frequency modulation. Nets were the backbone of combined arms, enabling a tempo that shattered enemy cohesion and opened the path to liberate France. By early August 1944 operation, Cobra's success had reshaped the Normandy campaign, propelling 1st United States Army beyond Avranches into open terrain. The initial bombardment by about 3,000 aircraft had cracked German 7th Army's line, but the sustained breakout, driven by Rhino cutters and frequency modulation radios, secured a decisive operational advantage. 4th Armored Division's advance, guided by SCR 500, 8 radios operating at 20 to 27.9 MHz, maintained clear voice nets across platoons, companies, and battalions in sectors covering more than 10 miles in a single day. Infantry equipped with SCR 300 backpack radios at 40 to 48 MHz coordinated with Shermans at hedgerow breaches, where Rhino cutters mounted on approximately 3 out of 5 tanks smashed through bocage walls. This synergy, combining physical breaching with informational control, turned a tactical puncture into a strategic flood, setting the stage for the German counterstroke at Mortagne, planned for 7th to 13th August, and the Falaise. Encirclement. The number that matters is about 3,000 aircraft, igniting the chaos, but frequency modulation nets ensured the breakout's relentless momentum. German 7th Army under Colonel General Paul Hausser faced near-total collapse. Panzerlehr's destruction left a gaping hole. 5th Parachute Division and remnants of 2nd Panzer, 116th Panzer and 2nd SS Panzer could not stem the tide. Their Fugue 5 amplitude modulation radios, operating at 27 to 33.3 MHz, with around 10 to 20 watts, struggled with interference, while severed landlines crippled command coordination. German response faltered after several days of United States pressure. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, overseeing OB West, could not rally reserves fast enough to counter the United States advance. United States frequency modulation nets, by contrast, enabled real-time redirects, allowing VIII and VIII Corps to exploit gaps and bypass resistance, maintaining a pace that shattered German cohesion. The Falaise pocket forming by mid-August became Cobra's strategic legacy. The breakthrough at Avranches enabled Allied forces to envelop German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, trapping thousands in a shrinking corridor. IX Tactical Air Command's P-47 Thunderbolts, guided by SCR 508 and SCR 300 radio reports, continued to devastate German columns, as seen in the Roncey Road battles through 30th July. A Sherman commander spotting a retreating convoy could pass coordinates for strikes within minutes, a tempo far harder to achieve on German amplitude modulation nets. This air-ground integration, reliant on frequency modulation's clarity, ensured German attempts to escape were met with relentless destruction. Cobra's success, rooted in communication superiority, paved the way for the liberation of Paris by 25 August and the broader Allied advance into France. The operation's impact extended beyond immediate gains, demonstrating how integrated systems could overcome terrain and enemy resistance. The enduring lesson of Cobra was the power of reliable communication in combined arms warfare. SCR 508 and SCR 300 frequency modulation nets, markedly less susceptible to static in cluttered terrain, enabled United States forces to navigate the bocage's constraints, coordinating armor, infantry, and air strikes with precision. German reliance on amplitude modulation and fragile landlines, vulnerable to bombardment, left their command structure brittle, unable to match the United States tempo. Rhino cutters opened lanes, frequency modulation radios maintained control within them, airstrikes exploited reported movements. This triad, proven in Cobra, became a blueprint for future operations, highlighting the critical role of communication in modern warfare. As First United States Army advanced, the bocage's chokehold became a distant memory, replaced by open fields where radio nets continued to drive the Allied campaign. Operation Cobra, concluded by 31st July, marked a turning point not just in Normandy, but in the evolution of battlefield coordination, where frequency modulation's clarity turned chaos into victory.